everyone. Thank you.
A very good morning to all the participants. By the grace of God, we are all hale and healthy, able to attend this session, and I thank Him for the blessing. Today we are going to be a part of another milestone in history of our college because Mr. Hemant is the first alumni of PG Department of Chemistry to carry out his PhD abroad. He is the youngest speaker of the conference panel and personally most humble, hardworking and genuine human being. I welcome Mr. Hemant to this session. Dr. C.B. K.S., Assistant Professor and Head of the Department of Physics, University of Kerala, Karyavottam campus, is a very good friend of mine and another gem of a person. He will be chairing this session. I welcome you, sir. Dr. S.E. Natraj, our principal, is with us. I welcome you, sir. Dr. M.P. Somashekharappa, Head of the Department, is with us. A hearty welcome to you, sir. We have many alumni of our college participating and encouraging Mr. Hemant today. I welcome each one of you. I request our principal to address the gathering before we proceed any further.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah, fine. And, good morning to everyone present here. And, special good morning to Dr. Hemant. So, I am extremely happy that, the Department of Chemistry of our college is running a international webinar series, almost 10 to 12 talks.
Natraj sir, we can't hear you. Natraj sir. Natraj sir.
Nice, right? No. But anyway, it's very, pleasing for me to address the gathering. I believe, the talk of, Hemant regarding radiations, radiology, science and all that, brings, it gives a good exposure to, all the participants that are there today. I extend, I wish, all the best and good success to, today's presentation and, overall the webinar series. Thank you one and all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your kind words. I'll now take a few minutes to introduce our chairperson of the session, Dr. C.B. K.S. He has been working as Assistant Professor in Government Engineering College, Barton Hill, Thiruvananthapuram, between February 2011 to February 2014. From October 2010 to February 2011, he has been Assistant Professor in MA College, Kothamangalam, and in 2006 to 2010, he was a research fellow at National Institute for Interdisciplinary Science and Technology, NIIST, CSIR, Thiruvananthapuram. His academic qualification is mind-blowing. From 2001 to 2004, he completed his BSc Physics. He was a rank holder with 98.2%. 2004 to 2006, MSc Physics, again a rank holder with 89.1%. 2005, December, he qualified JRF CSIR exam. He was a top 25 qualified for Syama Prasad Mukherjee Fellowship, SPM Fellowship. 2011, he did his BSc exam. He was second rank in branch of physics. May 2011, he did his PhD in physics from University of Kerala. He has 12 papers to his credit in international journals which are peer-reviewed, and he has presented 22 papers in international and national conferences and seminars. His research interests include brain initiative, nanomaterial structure, electric and electron transport properties of oxide materials, structural studies in phosphor metals, semiconducting materials for shielding applications, phase transition studies using XRD, SEM and EDs. He loves to give lectures. He is a very good resource person and he has attended many workshops. His biodata runs to pages. So I would like to invite him as a resource person some other day, and I will completely introduce this new very brilliant personality to our gathering. So now I hand over the session to Dr. CBKS. Sir, the session is yours.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, thank you. And good morning to all of you. And dear participants, if you are ready, you can just type yes in your chat box. We need your complete attention because we have a very bright young person who is going to talk on a very advanced topic. So thank you all for your response in the chat box. I welcome all to today's meeting. And let us begin. Like I should say that I am grateful to my dear friend, who's the convener of this program, Dr. Pratima, for finding me apt for this event. And I had a telephonic conversation with the convener, and I understand that today we have a very distinguished speaker, Mr. Hemant Kumar. And in the telephonic conversation, I could understand that he's a proud alumni of this IDSG Government College. And I also understand that he's the youngest speaker. And currently he is a doctoral student, Department of Clinical Neuroscience, Psychiatry Section, Karolinska Institute, Stockholm student. And before let me start this session, let me share a brief professional career of Hemant. I was really fascinated to go through his professional career. I was interested to know that. So I thought I should share that first. So I have already told that he is now working in Karolinska Institute. Before that, he was working as a research associate in Department of Molecular and Medical Pharmacology, University of California, Los Angeles. And he also worked as radiochemist at King Faisal Specialist Hospital and Research Center, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And very fascinatingly, I was interested in reading his main ambitions and achievements. Like over the last period of 10 years, he was working in radiochemistry. He has developed many well-defined protocols for radiosynthesis, radio labeling, for the use of PET, which I am personally interested in. I used to work on brain research also, so I am looking forward. His analytical skills and his working knowledge of analytic instruments, programming softwares, and his expertise in documentation, I think he'll be a great asset to this international webinar on advances in chemical sciences and health and education. I should say that he's befitting to his expertise is befitting to the present theme. So before the talk, a few instructions for all the online attendees. So what you can do is that please post your queries and comments in the chat box. Okay. At the end of the talk, we will have selected few questions and queries to the speaker. So this may help in the smooth conduct of the talk without any further delay. Over to you, dear Hemant. Please proceed to your talk. Welcome.
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you for this opportunity. And good morning to everyone. Today, I'm going to present application of PET tracers in molecular imaging and drug discovery. Myself, Hemant Malapura. I'm a doctoral student at Karolinska Institute in the Department of Clinical Neuroscience. In this talk, briefly, I'm going to introduce the contents, what I'm going to talk. PET isotope production and working principles. What are the PET isotopes we are using for clinical and preclinical application? And what are the roles of PET isotopes, PET tracers in molecular imaging, especially in oncology and neuroimaging? and how they are going to help to discover the drug, especially in psychiatry drug discovery. At the end, I'm going to summarize the whole talk. First, we talk about PET isotopes, production and working principle. In the background, if you see the picture, electromagnetic spectrum from radio waves to gamma waves and its applications. Here we are going to talk more about radio active elements which emits gamma rays, beta rays, and alpha. And this is the another application in molecular imaging. When they use PET tracers, they emit radiation and they detect the radiation, that is especially gamma radiation. Here we are talking about more beta and gamma as well. Beta is going for therapy purpose and gamma is more about diagnosis purpose. So as you see in the spectrum, almost at the end, you could see the gamma rays, and you can't even see in your eyes, but it is a more powerful and more energetic rays in the electromagnetic spectrum. Moving on to next slide. We'll briefly talk about the early discovery of radioactivity. When William Röntgen discovered X-ray in 1895, it opened many doors to new era of research. Because of his invention, he got the first Nobel Prize in 1901 for the physics. And in the same time, that is the time actually, end of the 19th century, many scientists from all over the world, they have been working on many experiments, and they're finding a new elements and new science discoveries. But when Röntgen invented X-rays, that is the main gate for, like, he opened the main gate for the new era of research, especially for molecular imaging. Before X-ray, they used as conventional imaging. Then later, it converted as a different applications for many other purposes, including industrial applications. In the same time, Henry Becquerel was working on his experiment. He discovered the radioactivity in 1986, and he got the Nobel Prize for his discovery, for physics Nobel Prize in 1903. In the same time, Lord Ernst Rutherford, he was working in Canada at that time. He was also working on the radioactive material. That time he discovered the concept of half-life. What we talk about half-life, it was discovered by Rutherford. And he also discovered the existence of radon. And also he studied the form of decays like alpha and beta, and he named it alpha and beta. Like when isotopes decays, we don't know what kind of decay is happening. Now we have well-established protocol for each and individual isotopes, what kind of decay it happens, but before it was not the case. He studied individual isotopes, how they are emitting the radiation, and after emission, what it became like from parent to daughter, how it changes. After studying this, he proposed his discovery of alpha and beta radiation in 1899, and he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry in 1908. And another important and more fascinating and curious personality, Marie Curie. She discovered the radium and polonium along with her husband, Pierre Curie. This is the one of the one of the more interesting and the more fascinating research actually. Like if you read about the history, how they discovered, it's very fascinating. Please read about that that story. Very inspiring as well.
Hello.
Both husband and wife, they
Hello,
got
Amy.
Nobel Prize in
Amy.
Physics 1903.
Okay, okay. Thank you, thank you.
Let's talk about different forms of decay. Yeah, as I earlier discussed, Rutherford, he proposed the theory of alpha and beta decay. Here, alpha particle, the alpha particle, like when isotopes emit radiation, it emits like the particle, like here alpha, like a helium, atomic number 2 and molecular number 4, and the helium consists of 2 proton and 2 neutron, and it is high energy. It really damages the cell like you can't even imagine. But you can. We'll talk about more about how we can control and protect from the radiations. In the beta particle, it's like a electron. Beta particle is more useful for therapeutical purpose in oncology. And positron, this is the main the form of decay we are going to talk more about in this presentation. So it is like positron is like a positive beta plus beta, like the opposite to beta rays. And the proton, the nuclei of hydrogen atom, like it is hypothesis the proton decay, it's still happening. And neutron and gamma rays, we discussed here in electromagnetic spectrum, the gamma rays, the mode of decay actually. So in nuclear medicine, most of the isotopes they emit gamma for diagnosis purpose. They use radioisotopes which emit gamma for diagnosis purpose. In the spectrum, what we see in previous slide, all the radiation, like in the spectrum, all you've seen from radio waves to the gamma rays. They all range is not hazardous. They are not damaging like our cell, or it's not harmful. But there is the range after visible spectrum you've seen after move from left to right. Once we reach the visible spectrum, then it's going on to right side. It will dangerous. It started affecting harmful for like our regular activities. Like if you go to the sun, if you get UV, like most of the people, like not in our South Asian region, if you come to western part of the world, people are more sensitive to sun rays. For UV, they will get skin cancer. So we'll move on to the gamma. Here we discuss the type of ionizing radiation which use it for application of diagnosis and therapy purpose. Alpha particle. Nowadays in the theranostic means like when they use some drugs for treat the disease like cancer. The alpha therapy is one of the upcoming research, and it's been going on from last 2 decades, but from last 1 decade it's taken more hit, and there are more research going on, and it's very useful therapy. As you've seen, alpha, you can stop alpha particle by paper. The sheet of paper can stop alpha particle. And next, the beta particle. The beta particle, as you see here in the picture, like in aluminum plate, you can stop the beta particle. In for say beta particle, iodine 131, it emits beta. They use to treat the thyroid actually. So here, like as you've seen, you need a aluminum plate, but when it hits the cell, you can assume, okay, it's going to kill actually. In fact, it damages the cell. Alpha damages the cell more, and beta a little bit less compared to alpha. And X-ray, if you see here, it cannot be stopped with aluminum plate. We need a lead brick. The lead, you already study lead in a periodic table. That is one of the element in the periodic table, and it can stop the gamma rays or X-rays, but not 100%. There is a factor depending upon the energy of the X-ray or gamma. We need that much thickness of lead to stop the radiation. And as you see, next is gamma. Gamma, again, you can stop with the lead. It's high energy. Definitely, when you expose to gamma or X-ray, it will be harmful. It really damages the cell. Neutrino, this is more powerful. Neutron, then it's going to hit the lead brick, and it passing through the lead wall, and it again going to hit the concrete. Like here, they gave a concept of how energetic radiations are: alpha, beta, X-ray, gamma, and neutrons. And this is important part to know why we use gamma for diagnosis purpose and why we use beta and alpha particle for therapy purpose. Before going to further slides, we just talk about what are the units we use for radioactive material or substance. Becquerel, the 1 disintegration per second. To honor the scientist who invented radioactivity, they name one of the unit for radioactivity is becquerel. 1 second you get 1 disintegration. And another unit is Curie. This is for usage. When it comes to different application, they use different units to measure the radiation, but for the application purpose all over the world, whether it's in millicurie or whether it's in megabecquerel. The Curie is another unit. It's 3.1 into 10 to the power of 10 disintegration per second. Could you imagine, like you put one substance in front of you, 1 Curie means it emitting that many radiations. Integration just in a snap, you get 3.7 into 10 to the power of 10 disintegration. It's really huge. It sounds like just number, but it's really harmful and huge number. Like when you work with dosimetry of radiation, you will understand how the Curie of radioactivity will be useful for application, and it will be harmful when it is not handled properly. And by the way, in the slide is a becquerel, and here is Madame Curie. When we when I introduce PET isotope applications and how we produce PET isotopes, there are many isotopes naturally available, but there are many they are not available. We have to produce using a cyclotron. They are artificially produced isotopes. Basically, we call accelerator. Why here I call cyclotron? This is a cyclic accelerator. That's why I call it here cyclotron. There are linear accelerator and cyclic accelerator. The linear accelerator application goes behind this talk, so I'm not going to discuss about linear accelerator. Here, cyclotron, the particle accelerator moves in a cyclic path. That's why they call the cyclotron. They use here the proton and the deuteron as a beam to produce isotopes. You take one parent isotopes, then you hit with another, the beam we call beam, you can call it source, with the high energy. The high energy in the sense you cannot see how proton looks or neutron looks, but the energy of the beam, when it hit the parent source, it can remove proton or neutron. That much energy it has. We'll talk about more in the next slide. And Ernest Orland Lawrence is the one who invented the cyclotron and got the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1939. He was working in the University of California, Berkeley with his student. So both took the project, and they finally invented the cyclotron. And to honor his great work, they named one of the element in our periodic table, lawrencium. The atomic number is 103. Let's talk principle of the cyclotron. As you see in the picture, there are Ds. There are two Ds. You can call D1 or D2. They're like semicircular. They're placed opposite each other, and there is a little bit space here, and the space is to introduce the source here in the center. And electric field applied in a square waves here, and magnetic field vertical to the Ds, and electric field and magnetic field here perpendicular each other. And here, if you see the red dot circle here, I use photon beam here. You can use the deuteron, but for discuss about this example, we take proton as a beam. When the proton started here, like hydrogen gas, then they break the bond, then the H minus forms, then it comes here. Then with the square waves, when it positive, the D's charge of the D's turns negative. Then it's positive. When negative, it repels each other. It come here again. It turns like from negative to positive. It switch. Then it repels. It moves. Then magnetic field, it helps to keep in the path. When it moves, it increases the radius and increase the velocity as well. That is the way they increase the energy of the beam. When it reaches like hundreds of circulation, is depending upon our application. That's where they decide energy of the cyclotron. When it reaches the maximum, it comes out with high energy. They put a carbon foils here to extract from H minus to extract the electron. Then it forms. There are a few isotopes I'm going to mention here, which are used for a PET application. One is fluorine-18. It produced with a nuclear reaction. We use O18 water as a parent source with the proton beam, and after the reaction, it releases the neutron and converted as F18, the fluorine-18. Half-life of this isotope is 110 minutes, and the purity of the positron is 97%. When it decays, the purity, like it's a 97%. It's very important. The purity will give the resolution of the images. As you see in the picture here, if there is no purity of positron, you don't see the clear picture. Carbon-11 is one of the isotopes. We use nitrogen gas with a proton beam, and it releases alpha, then form carbon dioxide with in the target. The carbon dioxide is the source we produce to do the reaction. Nitrogen-13 with it's a normal water. We bombard normal water with the proton beam, and it releases alpha, and it forms nitrogen-13. And gallium-68. This is not cyclotron produced isotopes, but we can do from the cyclotron as well. But the germanium-68 is available. They extract germanium-68. It's some byproduct of the nuclear reaction. So after extracting germanium, it decays through electron capture. And the purity of this isotope is 88%, and half-life is 68 minutes. How does PET works? You have to insert the needle for, say, biopsy. And we have to choose the tracer as per the target. It's not like you can use any tracer for anything. You have to choose the target before you decide to use the tracer. So it's works specific and selectivity of the target. And radio tracer preparation and administration. Once the radio tracer prepared, it's more chemistry. After purification, then we administrate through IV. Then wait for an uptake. Once you inject it to the body, you have to wait to the molecule to reach the target. Once it reaches the target, we have to take the patient or animal model for PET scan or the radiation detection. Basically, the radiation detection, when you inject the radiation into the body, you have to detect where it is inside. So that's where we get the image. And converting aqua data into the image. Here, after the scan, you just detect the radiation. Then you don't give anything. Then you convert that the aqua data into the image. As you see in the picture, per se, we already injected one drug here. The target is the brain. It entered the brain and it emitted in the radiation. Here, carbon-11 is the isotopes. Through positron decay, it forming boron-11. Then when positron travels, as I mentioned earlier, it's positive beta. After traveling some distance, like it attenuates, the positron, it forms two gamma rays. It's almost opposite direction, not exactly 180 degree, little bit, there is a little bit of variation, but opposite direction. Then they detect this gamma radiation with the detectors. After the detection of gamma, basically the gamma energy is 511. When positron energy is different, but when it comes to the 511, then it splits actually. To do that extent, it travels like from 0.5 to few mm. Once it travels, then it's attenuate and it can be detectable in gamma detector. But positron itself we cannot detect in this detector, but we can detect gamma. Then you see the image here. It's an example. That's a normal the brain image. This is how it looks. PET infrastructure, how it works. As we discussed, from cyclotron, art cell, made with lead bricks, and radiochemistry. This is the labeling plot. This is where chemistry happens. Then after the purification, we have to sterilize the product to make it eligible for the injection. Once the sterilization done, then the dose dispensing to the clinic, like maybe patient, sometimes animal model, then it goes to the PET scan. This is how basically the scan works. And we'll talk about more characteristics of the tumor, how our tracers is more applicable for the PET jumps in here. That helps actually. If you see here, not only one part, there are multiple parts. You see the tumors. Accurate diagnosis and evaluation of spread of tumor in the body, that really helps to give the therapy, like the chemotherapy, or they are going for radiation, or are they going for surgery. It's all decided with these images nowadays. That's very useful and improve the patient care. Obviously, when you have a well-defined treating protocols, then definitely it helpful for the patient. And detect areas of infection and inflammation. Sometimes you got a hit and you have a bruise and you have a pain. That means you have some disease that can be differentiate from this scan. Inflammation or infection, and follow up after the patient having the cancer and treated. They must do follow-up scans for every 6 months or at least every 1 year, whether the cancer is recurring or not. So for that reason, it's very, very helpful. And another different type of tumors, which are like very critical thing. So they have to see through the disease. That's why this scan is very, very useful. For say the brain tumor, we cannot see brain tumor through conventional imaging. It cannot differentiate, but the PET will differentiate. We'll see more images in next slides. And we use nowadays we use like tens of tracers for oncology application, but here I mentioned 5 major applications. One is the F18 fluorodeoxyglucose. It's a glucose metabolism. It's like when you heard of people are having PET scan, that means they have FDG scan. And another is the C11 methionine. This is also one of the tracers used to see the brain tumor. and another one is gallium-68 Dotanac. It's for somatostatin receptor. Gallium-68 PSMA11, it's for prostate cancer, and gallium-68 FOPI, it's the diagnosis of varieties of cancer. Actually, that will be giving results for like varieties of cancer. This molecule is more specific for many kind of cancers. Yes, this is the image of FOPI scan. If you see here, FDG, combine here. You cannot see in FDG. You can see here it's a pancreatic tumor, and esophageal cancer you can see here, not in FDG. Like, I'm differentiating what is the application of other tracers. Like FDG is a different application, and again gallium-68 FOPI, it helps to see the different kind of tumors. This is the lungs cancer, and this is head and neck. You cannot see here much, but you can see here clearly. And colon cancer, you cannot see in the top picture, and in the bottom picture you can see thyroid. This is no uptake. There is no uptake for the thyroid from the gallium-68 FOPI PET. And this is the methionine scan. FDG, you cannot see any tumor, but PET, you can see the tumor. You see the yellow spot, this is the tumor. And the PSMA, this is for prostate cancer. You see here in the image, you see the dark spots. Like there is a one darkest spot and tiny little bit of blur. This is the prostate sits close to the bladder. When we inject FDG, you cannot see because most of the activity sitting in the bladder, it gives more background. But more specifically, PSMA, it is not like that. So you can see the prostate here, yellow spot. This is the prostate. You can clearly differentiate between the bladder and prostate with this molecule. And this is methionine PET. For again the brain tumor. You see here there is a little bit tiny spot, but it's more clearly here. This is a red spot, and after therapy you don't see anything. After, as I mentioned, post therapy also it will be very useful to follow up the disease. And these are the other tracers for neuroimaging. Like the whole body imaging is different, and when it comes to the brain imaging, it's entirely different. We have a very more specific requirement for the brain. Another one is the C11 deprenyl for neuroinflammation. Sometimes when you have some inflammation in your brain, you can differentiate with this molecule. The flumazenil is a GABA-A antagonist. This more steady for drug discovery, and to optimize the dose of the drug, they use this molecule. And the C11 raclopride and the selective dopamine a D2 and D3 antagonist, and the C11 PE2I dopamine transporter imaging. It's like that imaging. And L-DOPA, dihydroxyphenylalanine, to measure the uptake of dopamine precursor. It's Parkinson disease. We can differentiate whether the patient having Parkinson disease or not after knowing the symptoms of the disease. And to show in one slide, if you see, this is the smallest neuron you could not imagine you could able to see through your naked eyes. But these are the many things happening in a small thing. If you see these two, like a slightly green pot, these are the different molecules to try to reach this target. So it's a very vast and a very beautiful subject when you come to design the drug for the brain imaging. Let's go on to the PET tracer's role in drug discovery. Before that, we just talk about how drug discovery works. Discovery and development. When we have an idea how to develop a drug, then, as I mentioned before, it has to be more specific and selective for the target. When like for say the paracetamol, when you have a fever, you take a paracetamol. You take in the stomach, but how your fever go down? There is the beauty of the science here. So you have to find out before you develop the drug. You have to find out how it is going to reach the target, and you have to develop in a way. When you put the same chemical in your body, it has to work as you expect. In theoretically, you expect it has to work this way. In a practical way, also it has to work in that way. Once you develop the drug, we do in vitro studies and in vivo studies. In vivo studies, after getting the good results, good means the good to go for results. Like you may not say, oh, my drug is beautiful, it's going to work forever. No, when you get some positive results, that is a green light for next step. You may get red light for next step. You don't know. Then afterwards, like after some stages, we will have a promising result. Then you go for the clinical research. Preclinical research, they're like stage 1, stage 2. There also we use animal models. Once it works in the animal models, then it's promising. That is the stage that people have some belief, okay, this drug is going to work. It may not, but still we have faith to it's going to work. Then it comes to the clinical trials. Like clinical trial phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You might have familiar with these words because of this corona pandemic. So many drugs, they are not fulfilled all the clinical research. Like stage 4, they have studied only to 1, 2, and they're trying to release the product into the market. But some committee is not accepting that because it's not ethically right. You did not study 3 and 4. There are many parameters to consider in the level of 3 and 4, and then it goes to review. Here is FDA. FDA, it's in USA. If you want to your drug approved and to be used in all over the world, you have to go for FDA approved. Otherwise, every country has their local ethic committee, so it can be approved from their local ethic committee, ethical committee. Sorry. Drug discovery, as I mentioned, you discover like 5,000 to 10,000 compounds. It takes like 5 years. Then it goes to preclinical. It may not work in that level, like only 250. Then like for 40 times, like 1 by 40, like here 250. It takes like preclinical trials 1.5 to 2 years. Then clinical trials 6 years. The clinical trials here is you may not get all the drugs get worked. Actually, in preclinical you will sort out whether it's going to work it or not. Then you will move on to preclinical trials and FDA reviews and post imaging. This is the next part. How PET tracers helps to psychiatric drug discovery. In general, drug discovery, we just discussed about PET tracers and its application in oncology and neurology, but how they are helping to drug discovery. The imaging is one thing, and here drug discovery is another thing. There are two different things, but the application is the same. They are doing the same job, but in a different level. We analyze the data and plan the study. In molecular biological techniques, have now revealed the existence of several novel receptors for which little or no prior pharmacological and functional data existed. You find your drug and you did some studies and you have data, but when it goes to human body, you do not know how it is going to behave. The pharmacological data, like in vivo, is a different study. When it goes to the human or animal model, it's a different study. When you have some study done with animal models or human models, human here is a volunteer. Once your drug is ready to inject, that time that's volunteer comes, you inject. Like you heard about, many people are ready to have a corona vaccines. So then you will know the result. Here PET is going to more helpful. Due to lack of data of functional significance, it's very much challenged to find a physiological role and identify selective agent and possible therapeutic indications. So in this lacking of information in the conventional method of discovery, the PET is going to be helpful. Is PET imaging reveals the secret? Yes, it is going to reveal the secret, how the drug is going to work and whether it is going to be with market or we can continue the research. We are going to find out. Most frequent approach to study how an enabled drug, once we labeled an enabled with isotopes, then how it is going to the target and how it is not. This is the one model. This is where specificity comes and selectivity comes. Again, in an additional way, and another way, labeled how it is going to bind, and unlabeled how it is not, like vice versa. They studied unlabeled and labeled. That gives more information to optimize the dose. And in this method, the effect of novel drug on physiological and biological parameters such as the glucose metabolism and blood flow. This is very important in terms of how drug behaving and effect on the human and targets. And this will be seen through PET scan. The demonstration of quantitative relationships between drug binding in vivo and drug effects in patients is used to validate targets for drug actions, to correlate pharmacological and physiological effect, and to optimize the clinical treatment. This is where it's very useful. Like for say you take here simple example, paracetamol. When a doctor says like Dolo 650, 3 tablets per day, like how they come up with the 350. So 650. So they do research, then they find a dose, then it helps to optimize the treatment. That's where when you take more in terms of in the treatment, it may be harmful. It may cause different effects on you. That's why they optimize the dose when it comes to the treatment. This is all it says actually. So in application, you know how we use the drug. Like when the doctor prescribe, that time you know how they are going to prescribe the drug to take like this kind of 100 mg or 200 mg. These are the very important criteria in the drug development. These are the criteria: in vitro affinity, in vitro selectivity, concentration in target sites, and reversibility of binding. These were labeled and unlabeled, and potency, toxicity. It would be useful, not harmful, non-specific binding, plasma protein binding, blood-brain barrier permeability. But this is the very critical stage in the development of drug for neuroimaging. The BBB, they call the test to transfer this layer to reach the brain for further reaction. The metabolism and choice of radionuclide and the radio labeling method. Here we discussed different PET isotopes, the F18, carbon-11, gallium-68, and N13. They are not fit for all molecules. We have to carefully choose the radioisotope for chemistry. Like it may work inside, but when you inject, it may not work. That is one of the critical steps to choose the isotope. And the few examples of PET tracers for neuroreceptor in drug discovery, especially when we study the psychiatric drug, like when someone having depression or some mood swing, they have to give some drug. Actually, you don't know. You have to try with patient. You cannot do that because you don't know how it is going to behave. When we do the study on animal models, you can know that's where it's developed. Now, after studying and optimizing the dose through all these methods, then you can optimize the amount of drug which can be given to the patient. And it's also useful to study pharmacokinetics, movement of drug in the body, to confirm the brain distribution. As I mentioned, once it crosses the BBB, whether it's crossing or not, to confirm that the drug binds to central neuroreceptor, the target, to identify relationship among dose, plasma concentration, and central receptor occupancy. This like concentration of the drug which is required to give to the patient, to provide additional information of absorption, bioavailability, distribution, and elimination, and when it is going to excrete from your body. When you discover the drug, you should know about these effects, like especially side effects. The drug before go for preclinical trial, because to hire to get a volunteers for the test, it's a very difficult task. So before jumping to the test step, you have to make sure it's going to be work. Otherwise, when you have the patient and everything is ready, your drug is not working, then it will be a problem. So therapy planning, the individual therapy planning and optimizing therapeutical effect and minimizing side effect. This is the very important when it comes to the therapy. After we discussed here the advanced techniques available and helping to drug discovery, but still, is there any room for improvement? Yes, there is always room for an improvement. We talked about neuroimaging and cancer diagnosis, but we are already late. The cancer, it's already here. But what nowadays they are doing before when they get cancer, can we know whether someone going to get a cancer? Yes, study is going on through early diagnosis of cancer through blood test. They're trying to find out the sequence in the DNA. They're looking very, very tiny, like it's very hard to pronounce. There are many, many things actually. Just a tiny drop of blood, they extract tens of content in that, then they find out one content in there. They're very carefully looking for that content to find out whether is someone going to get a cancer or not. There is a change in the behavior of that that element in the blood sample. So it's very, very promising and very positive thing in the future. Maybe it can save millions of people from dying from the cancer, and we don't know, maybe our loved one. There is a need of precision in the imaging technique to see in detail picture of the brain. Like as we discussed in the imaging, it's always an improvement. When we have the imaging techniques, it needs to be improved to see the detailed image when we do the scan. And in terms of chemistry, we have to find a new synthesis method for the tracers for more accessibility. Maybe some method useful for only for body scanning, not for brain scanning. So we have to find a ways, in a way it's blend with both brain imaging and normal body imaging, and it has to be accessible for all the centers, not like only well-defined advanced laboratory, but maybe we can done in any place in the world. So we have to find that kind of method and routes to synthesize the tracers. And the need to look carefully for new biomarkers to diagnose the neurodegenerative disorders. As I discussed about the cancer diagnosis, likewise the Parkinson disease. This is also affecting like almost more than 10 million people on the planet in the present day. But we could not see it because it's not advanced diagnosis techniques available in the market. So that's why we could not hear it about Alzheimer's disease. Like in our language, they say Maraguli Kaile. Like we don't know what they call after people getting old. They don't remember stuff. They just they talk something. They don't properly behave. It's not because of their old. It's because of this kind of disease. So we need to find a proper way to diagnose this disease that will be very useful to identify the proper disease. And in summary, the PET imaging is a non-invasive advanced techniques and allows to study molecular level changes, advances the techniques to study cancerous disease and to do the planning for required treatment, and to study cancerous disease and for the treatment, and helps to find out reliable pathway to diagnose the treatment for neurodegenerative disease. As I mentioned before, it helps to find out the proper pathway to diagnose the disease and enhance the success rate of early drug development, and it saves times. So it helps to know whether a drug is going to work or not. So of course, it's going to save time and as well money. So because you will know in early stage, you don't continue that one for 1 year, then you know, oh, it's not working. It's not like that. So it helps to know that. This is end of my talk, and I would like to thank to all IDST staff and my beloved professors. I learned under them, and all my supervisors with their support, I'm studying here, and they are helping me to do research to produce PET radio tracers for cancer diagnosis and neuroimaging. Thank you. I like to take a question.
So the session is open for discussion. I think we have 2 questions in the chat box, and Kiran is there. Kiran may is there in the online list, or you can ask your question directly to the speaker.
Yes.
Okay. I think I will ask on his behalf.
Yeah, please.
He has asked, have we identified what is the percentage division of cells in the case of cancerous cells? If there is a percentage in the division of the cells in cancerous tissues using PET scan. Can you put some thoughts on that? Using
sure.
these PET studies, whether the division, how the percentage happens. Have you come across those things?
Yes, but here not in the cellular level, but it's in the molecular level. As we've seen, in the cellular level, when you know there is a tumor, then you do biopsy. When you take the biopsy out, then you test, then you know what the cancerous cell is present in that piece of meat you took it from the tumor. But here you know how it is spread in your body, not in terms of like we cannot quantify the percentage of cancerous cell, but you can quantify the tumor in the body, where it is, and the size of the tumor, and whether it is sitting somewhere in the part which can be operatable, and somewhere in the part in the critical, like it's close to the lungs. You cannot cut the lungs when they do the operation, like surgery. So it gives this kind of information, but not in terms of cellular level, the percentage of cancerous cells in the body. Like you can quantify the tumors, but per se the tumor size is 3 mm or 10 mm or 12 mm and 7 mm. Like you can quantify in this sense, not like in terms of percentage.
Okay. One more question from Dr.
Yeah. Sir, if it is the blood cells, there is no tumor, isn't it? How can you identify the leukemia?
No, I am afraid these scans, they work not for leukemia. Especially, I'm only discussed here what are the cancerous type. It's helping to diagnose the cancer. It doesn't mean it helps to all kind of cancer. There are more than 100 types of cancer, but we cannot do the scan for all kind of cancers. But we can do in a primarily symptoms, and blood test reveals the stage of the, like whether they have a cancer or not. And further afterwards, once they confirm with the blood test, then they go for imaging, like maybe beginning in the CT scan, then they go for PET scan.
Yeah.
But
Thank
not,
you, sir.
we cannot.
And
Yeah.
Is there any color change in the case of tumors, the cancerous cells that are present in body during this scan?
Like you already seen the image. I'd like to show that one again. Yeah, if you see here, this is a colon cancer. Could you see the image now?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yeah, if you see this image, it is one of the patient had a colon cancer. There is a color change. You see, there is a shoulder. You don't see anything. There is a bladder. It's a common. There's a brain. You'll see a little bit, but there is a red spot. There is a red spot means there is a tumor. There is a tumor means there is a more metabolic activity. There is a more metabolic activity. That means it needs energy. As I mentioned here, the fluorine 18, it's a fluor in terms of tracer, we inject fluorodeoxyglucose. When the glucose enters the body, where the high rate of metabolism activity is going on, it goes and sit in that part. Here, there are tumors in the colon. That's why it's sitting in the tumor. There is a intensity variation in the spot. Like you see red, yellow. The red is the more intense. That's where the intensity of the tumor more, and yellow is a little bit less, like the less intensity of the tumor. That means it's growing. This is where the PET reveals the way of tumor present in the body.
Yeah, I need some clarification, sir. If that organ is going to function more and more, then it needs more and more metabolic activity. How can you differentiate the cancerous metabolism and normal high-level metabolism?
That's why here, especially that kind of metabolism activity happens in the brain, actually, not in all other organs. It happens, but not like cancerous cells. Cancerous cells really need more energy here. Like, well, that's why FDG goes and sit where exactly the cancerous cells are there in the body. Or sometimes it's infection, or sometimes maybe inflammation. That is another drawback of FDG scan. We cannot differentiate between, as you mentioned, high metabolic activity. Some reason people having high metabolic activity, not everywhere, somewhere in some, maybe you got some inflammation in somewhere in your body. So there is an uptake in the FDG. That doesn't mean the people, whoever have that kind of symptoms, they have a tumor. But we can differentiate actually. So it basically, the appearance, the way of looking in the picture, that reveals for radiologists who, since they have been doing that and looking the thousands of images every day, they can easily tell it is from the tumor or it's from higher metabolic activity. And to confirm that, they can do different scans actually, and do some different tests. Or if they have a doubt, they can do a biopsy test to take a sample out in that area to test. So that can clear the doubt. But definitely there is a way to sort it out if they have questions, something like that. So when metabolic activity are in a different organs and comparing with the cancerous cell.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Then there is Dr. Madhukar. Sir, you want to ask him personally, or shall I ask him ask?
You can ask that.
Yeah. He's asking that in the COVID times, this COVID vaccine, how is that useful?
The COVID, yes. Here the problem is they're trying to find out what exactly causing COVID. Like they're having a very hard time to find out that. That's why we are still unable to develop any method in terms of PET. When we have more data, when we find, as I mentioned earlier, we need a more specific site for that. Like, for say, I say a brain. So there are hundreds of parts in the brain. Like which gland you are focusing on, which part of the brain you are focusing on. In that, they have hundreds of chemicals. Like we need that kind of selectivity and specificity when come to the PET tracers. So I am afraid we do not have that kind of information in terms of COVID. So we are not able to develop any method for COVID. But in the future, yes, if it stay like this, definitely we will have the model developed for to find a drug for the COVID. If all supports, actually, there are many factors to consider. That means we cannot have models for all the drugs, but especially psychiatric drugs. Here I discussed, since I'm working in a psychiatry section, we all deal with only psychiatric drugs here, and we study only brain, how drug is affect. So it's more related to drug and other kind of therapeutic drugs, which already they know particular target sites and more specifically and more selective. But here it's not the case.
Okay, I think that answers
Okay,
the
sir.
question.
Okay.
One more question from Dr. Patel. He's asking how many times a patient can go for PET study for imaging for a specific problem. If more than 5 times in a month, what will happen?
No, sometimes yes, but the thing is, when the patient need a scan to decide something, per se, I would like to share my personal experience here. We had one of our relatives, she had a ovarian cancer. We had a scan for 2 weeks ago, and we came today for operation. Then they had some blood test. Then blood test did not pass, so they told us go home, come back after a week. After a week, we came back. Everything was okay. Then they started doing operation. Once they cut out then they find out the tumor is not the way they exactly thought 3 weeks ago. It was so aggressive and it was all over the body. They could not able to operate actually. They had to close it as it is. So in that case, when they need to know what exactly going on and aggressiveness of the tumor, then they need sometimes like once in 2 times in a month actually, but definitely not 5 times in a month. But in special cases, according to the requirement, they can do 2 to 3 scans per month. And in terms of dosimetry also, it's feasible. Like we say it like in terms of 10 millisieverts, 20 millisieverts, but one FDG scan, that is the highest, we get 2.5 millisieverts per year. One patient can go through 5 scans per year without any problem, and more than that when they required.
Okay.
I hope it answers the question.
Yeah, one question, Dr. Jyoti. I want to ask you a question personally. Please, Jyoti.
Good morning, sir. Very nice talk, sir. Very nice talk.
Thank you.
Sir, I want to know, is there any drug for Alzheimer's disease? Is there any drug for Alzheimer's disease?
In terms of they're trying to address to control the symptoms, not the disease.
Okay. Sir, is there any early identification of onset of Alzheimer's, as it takes 10 years or more?
The simple answer is no.
That the person is okay.
Right, and
sir, at what stage we are going to know, sir?
Sorry, could you please repeat?
Hi, Jyoti. Could you please repeat the question?
Disease.
Your voice is breaking. I could not able to hear it. Sorry.
Connectivity issues. Probably Hemant will provide you email. So probably that will help you in future.
Like what I heard in the beginning, she asked me about the drug for Alzheimer's.
He was talking about Alzheimer's.
Yes, sir.
There are some drugs to address the symptoms of the disease. Alzheimer, Parkinson, and Huntington, most of these 3 diseases, they share simple, common symptoms. So to address these symptoms, they have some drugs, but not like, there is a drug going to treat Alzheimer. 5 years, he's not going to have Alzheimer. No. There is a study and research is going on. They're trying to find out a kind of protein which is causing the death of our brain cells. So they're trying to find antidote for that protein. When they inject that protein to the human body, that can attack that protein, or that can control or avoid the formation of the protein in the brain. So it's ongoing research. But hopefully in 5 to 10 years, we will have 1 or 2 drugs, or maybe 5 or 10 drugs for Alzheimer's disease, or that kind of diseases. Okay. But in the present...
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I think we have covered a lot of domains in a very short time. And if there is any other question you want to ask, just we will take one more if you want. Otherwise, let us go for this. Yeah. Okay, please.
Yes. Hemant, these are for diseases. Are PET useful for studying emotions? They say emotional studies like, say for example, if you get angry in a particular part or region, there is more activity. So is it applicable for studying emotions too?
Yes, yes, yes. I did not cover all the topic actually. When I was reading about all these things, yes, it's also covered. When the people think how the brain image looks, when they talk, how it looks, when they get angry, how it looks, there is a study, like for sure. But since I thought it's going to be huge information for in this type of application level, I did not discuss about that. Yes, it possible. It is possible.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Before we close the program, let me summarize the main points. In brief, we have started from the wavelength of light. So there was a lot of comments that coming in the chat box, and I see that there are many interested candidates for this program. And then touched about different types of radiation. Being physics, I was very curious. And I see that the resource person is so insightful in providing the basics and touching an interest in all the attendees. And from there, we talked about many other aspects regarding cancer and some of the statistics like 9.6 million people dies of cancer. That is an alarm thing. So from touching from lung cancer, he has also put forward some of the important things that we have to keep in mind, like high mass index, low fruit and vegetable intakes. These are all things that is causing it, and some measures can be taken from our side. And it looks that I feel that lot of topics is been covered, and I really appreciate that he has covered a lot of topics for the larger audience. So before concluding, a big thanks once again to the convener, Dr. Pratima, and she's my dear friend, for inviting me to chair this session. Also, I would like to, I am very happy that I was introduced to such a vibrant person, Hemant. I am looking forward to meet you personally through email.
Thank you.
Meet.
I'm looking for the same.
Also, we are starting a center of brain research, and I would like you to be in our advisory board too. We will definitely keep in contact, and thank you all for participating, attending, and cooperating with the proceedings. Thank you, and over to you, convener, please.
And I would like to say a few things. If you have any question regarding what we discussed and what I presented in this meeting, please write me back. I have presented my email ID here. You could able to see on the screen now. So please write me back if you have any question. I would love to answer and that clarifies if you have any doubts regarding today's session. And once again, I use this opportunity to thank you all my professors in IDST College and giving me the opportunity. I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you. First of all, I thank Dr. Sibi for chairing this session and moderating it flawlessly. He is in a process of refresher course. Have you completed it, Dr. Sibi?
Yes, I just completed yesterday.
Did you have any exams for that?
Yeah, we had an exam.
Yes. Here I asked Hemant whether he had exams for his doctoral sessions, and he told me in Sweden you do not have exams. You are given lectures in order to learn and not to test. So that's one thing which I really appreciate about the system in Sweden. There are no exams for such things. There is no theft. The crime rate is very less. People go by cycles, and sun really does not set for few days. So I think Karolinska Institute is lucky to have Hemant there. And Hemant is not lucky to be in Sweden because Hemant himself is a very good person. And troubles help us in troubleshooting and increasing our skills. Despite the technical glitches, Mr. Hemant has made us proud. Dr. S.C. Nataraj, Dr. M.P. Somshekarappa, Dr. Gauss Khan and Dr. Ganesh have all conveyed their regards to you and wishes, and wish you all success in your doctoral studies. And I am posting the feedback link for all the participants. And thank you, Hemant. Thank you, Dr. Sibi, and thank all the participants. Tomorrow we will be having a session, and tomorrow's session details will be posted in the WhatsApp group. Tomorrow we are going to begin at 2:30. So we are going to have Mr. Abhishek. Dr. Abhishek, he will be talking to us about how an industry is and what are the different parts in which students can get into the industry. So it will be a very informative session tomorrow. Kindly do join us. Thank you one and all. I am ending the meeting now. Thank you.
Thank you.
ಹಲೋ ಸುನಿಲ್, ಹೇಳಪ್ಪ. ನಮಸ್ತೆಪ್ಪ, ಹೇಳು. ಇದೆಯಾ? ಯಾವಾಗ ತರ್ತೀಯಾ? ನಾನಿಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಲೇಜಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಕಾಲೇಜಲ್ಲಿ ಬರ್ತೀಯ ಇಲ್ಲಿ? ನಾನಿಲ್ಲಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಕನ್ನಡ ಡಿಪಾರ್ಟ್ಮೆಂಟಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂತಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಕಣೋ. ಇಲ್ಲೇ ಬಾ. ಓಕೆ.